Fielding Yost was one of the greatest coaches in college football history. He raised Michigan football to national prominence in the early 1900s, fielding some of the most impressive teams in history from 1901 to 1905. His teams were so prolific, they earned the nickname Point a Minute. That's the subject of this video, Fielding Yost and the amazing Point a Minute Michigan teams of 1901 to 1905. I'm Jon Johnston, and this is Hardcore College Football History. Yost was born on April 30th, 1871 in Fairview, West Virginia. He was the oldest of 4 children, and his father was a farmer and a Confederate War veteran. By 17, he had earned a public school teaching certificate and also served as a local town deputy. As an adult, he was 6 feet tall, 200 pounds, although I also saw references to him being 6'2". Either way, he was a very large human being for that time. At age 24, after wandering between jobs, including working in the oil fields of West Virginia, he decided to attend West Virginia Law School in 1895. He played football there, and an interesting story from that time frame. In 1896, he transferred to Lafayette for 1 week to play against Penn and helped Lafayette beat them. The following week, he went back to West Virginia Law School. Penn had had a 36-game winning streak at the time, so it was surprising that Lafayette was able to beat Penn. And there were no rules against this type of transfer at the time. When he was asked about it later, Yost said he wanted to try out engineering for a week and then decided against it and went back to law school. What really happened at West Virginia was that he fell in love with football. He wanted a career in being a college football coach, but the problem was there no such thing as having a coaching career at college football at the time. Coaches tended to be hired a year at the time. There were some exceptions, let's say Walter Camp at Yale, in the Northeast, or Amos Alonzo Stagg at the University of Chicago was a rare one outside the Northeast. So Yost wandered from school to school until he created a career of his own. He started at 1897. He became the coach at Ohio Wesleyan in Delaware, Ohio. He also played tackle that season, and the team finished with a 7-1-1 record, while beating Ohio State and tying Michigan. Then in 1898, he moved to Nebraska, where he finished with an 8-3 record. Unfortunately, Nebraska couldn't pay him what they promised. They paid him only $160 of the $500 he was promised to coach. This was a somewhat common problem at the time because most teams weren't bringing in enough money to offset their traveling expenses. In 1899, Yost moved to Kansas and beat Nebraska, his former team, on his way to 10-0 record, while shutting out 6 opponents. Kansas scored 280 points that season compared to 37 points for their opponents. So next he left Kansas and he moved to Stanford in 1900. And the Stanford team that year finished 7-2 with 3 shutouts while scoring 154 points and only allowing 20 points total by their opponents. At the end of 1900, he was informed that Stanford had a new policy where they would only hire alumni as coaches. So he was cut loose again, left to drift until he found Michigan in 1901. Fate and destiny served him well from there. Before we talk about the Michigan teams in 1901 to 1905, I'd like to put into context where Michigan football was in 1901. Michigan's first year playing football was in 1879, and at the turn of the century in 1900, the power of football was largely, almost all of it, concentrated in the Northeast with the Big Four, Yale, Harvard, Princeton, and Penn. Those teams were considered the powerhouses of football. There was only one team that was probably starting to be recognized as maybe good, and that was the University of Chicago Maroons, as coached by Amos Alonzo Stagg. They had started playing football in 1892. Stagg was a known entity to the powers that be in the Northeast because he had played at Yale. Stagg is a charter member of the Rules Committee when it comes into being in 1902, 1903. So the big teams, not big as in Big Ten, but the big teams as in the Northeast teams, are slowly starting to recognize that some other teams might be decent, begrudgingly. So being part of the Rules Committee gives him more power and more recognition, which is good. Well, let's go back to Michigan. So Michigan is coming into this thing as really, they're Michigan. They're just another team at the time. In 1900, Michigan was a member of the Western Conference, which is a forerunner of the Big Ten. And they were already playing many of the teams they still play today. 1900, they played Purdue, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Notre Dame, Ohio State, and they did play Chicago at the end of the season on a loss. They went 7-2-1 for the season. So coming into 1901, the beginning of Yost, Michigan has yet to be recognized as a national power. They really aren't completely recognized as a regional power because they're still losing to the University of Chicago and Amos Alonzo Stagg. In order to be recognized as a regional power, they have to start beating Chicago. That's where we are when Fielding Yost takes control of Michigan football in 1901. Yost has immediate and unbelievable success in 1901, his first season at Michigan. The team finishes with an 11-0 undefeated record, including a 22-0 win over the University of Chicago Maroons, as coached by that Amos Alonzo Stagg guy. I can't say that enough. They tie Wisconsin for the Western Conference Championship, even though Wisconsin played only 2 conference games, while Michigan played 4. Things were kind of screwy back then. This is evidence of that. They beat Indiana, Northwestern, Carlisle, Ohio State, Chicago, as I mentioned, Iowa, and Stanford. They outscored their opponents 550-0. So they are not only undefeated, but they are unscored upon. They are the first team to play in a, air quote, bowl game. In the 1902 Rose Bowl in Pasadena, California. It wasn't called the Rose Bowl then because nobody really had an idea that there were such things as bowl games. But it was just a football game on the West Coast at the time. Michigan beats Stanford 49-0, and the Stanford captain comes to the Michigan captain when I think about 8 minutes left in the game and says that they're done. They're too tired to go on. They're too tired to proceed, too exhausted. Michigan beat them so badly that the Tournament of Roses organizers refused to have a football to represent an activity in the Tournament of Roses until 1916. So it actually kind of turns out as kind of a catastrophic event for showing off football in the Rose Bowl, but that's how dominant Michigan was in that game. Now, I'm not going to go through every team from 1901 to 1905, but let's just look at them from an overall perspective, and then I'll point out some things about each team as the years went on. Yost earned the nickname Hurry Up because he is constantly yelling at his players to hurry up. From the Topeka State Journal on December 8, 1904. Yost will stop a football man on his way to chapel or recitation, call off a number and demand, "Where should you be on that play?" Another one of his little peculiarities is the constant use of the words which give him his nickname. It is hurry up here and hurry up there until hurry up has become the name by which Yost is known all over the football world. From Allison Danzig's book, The History of American Football, Willie Heston, an All-American halfback all 4 years from 1901 to 1904, writes to Danzig about Fielding Yost, and he says this: he brought to Michigan an entirely new brand of football not known to the Big Ten nor the Middle West. Particularly, that was true of his offense. Speed and more speed was continually emphasized. Boss Weeks, the quarterback, was instructed to call his signal for the next play while the team was getting up for the last play. The linemen would jump into their respective positions. The quarterback would start giving another signal, but the first number was the starting signal. So the center would instantly snap the ball, the line would charge, and the play was off. This system would usually catch the opposing team off flat-footed. During the course of the game, the opposing team would sometimes learn the method being used and would charge at the moment our quarterback gave the starting signal. When this happened, Yost gave us a signal for the quarterback to call in the place of the play signal that told every player to hold. The center would not snap the ball immediately. The opposing line would charge over the scrimmage line. The ball would then be snapped, catching the opponent's offside, which would bring a penalty of 5 yards and a first down, because 5 yards was all it took to get a first down at that time. Michigan ran an offense that was known to run around 200 plays a game. If you compare that to today's game where you look at up-tempo offenses, today they might run around as many as 80 to 90 plays a game, and that's considered a lot of plays in a game. 200 plays is unbelievable when you take into account that players played both ways, and there weren't any substitutions or very limited. And I think in 1901 there were no substitutions really allowed unless a guy keeled over dead, and probably shouldn't be a joke, but that's how it was. The 200 plays, running this kind of offense is an amazing feat of human endurance when you consider that these games were largely played with mass play, where there were just huge amounts of bodies smashing into each other over and over and over. That's not the most amazing thing, though. The most amazing thing is that from 1901 to 1905, his teams had a record of 55 wins, 1 loss, and 1 tie, and they outscored their opponents by a total of 2,821 points to 42. 2,821 points to 42. That's astonishing. I don't care who you are, who you're playing, that is out of this world. That is why they earned the nickname Point a Minute. Now, in 1902, Michigan goes undefeated and outscores their opponents 644 to 12. And this includes victories against Michigan Agriculture, now known as Michigan State, to the tune of 119 to 0. They outscore Iowa 107 to 0, and they score 86 to 0 points against Ohio State. In 1903, they had a down year and they had a tie against Minnesota. And that tie ended up being the origin of the Little Brown Jug trophy, the rivalry trophy that the two teams still play for today. Michigan finishes 11-0-1 and outscore everyone 565 to 6. The 6 coming from the tie at Minnesota. In 1904, they continue to bash teams into the ground, where they have a 130 to nothing victory over West Virginia. They go 10-0 and outscore opponents 567 to 22. Then we get to 1905. In 1905, Michigan wins their first 12 games by a combined score of 495 to nothing. And the last game of the season is with their nemesis, the Chicago Maroons, as coached by Amos Alonzo Stagg. They lose 2-0, 2-0, because of a safety taken towards the end of the game. Now, what happened was a young man named Denny Clark was tackled for a safety as he tried to field a punt and bring it out of the end zone. And this is his own story, because the story of Denny Clark is quite tragic, and I will keep that for a separate video. But the loss to Chicago stops a Michigan 56-game unbeaten streak, and it marks the end of this era of Yost's point-a-minute teams. Yost would go on to coach at Michigan until 1923, when he took 2 years off and then came back to coach for the 1925 and 1926 seasons. He served as the Michigan athletic director from 1921 to 1940. He compiled an overall head coaching record of 198 wins, 35 losses, and 12 ties. The Yost point-a-minute, score-a-minute teams from 1901 to 1904 are recognized by the NCAA and Michigan as national championship teams. So they are included in the 11 total national championships that Michigan claims for football. At the time, Michigan was paramount in starting to have other schools besides just the powers in the Northeast recognized as being good at football. Back in the 1901 through 1905 era, they crowned national championships by really just kind of making them up. Largely, the Northeastern newspapers would have writers that were well known, and they would just say this team is a national champion and this team is a national champion. It's really kind of goofy, but they just kind of declared some team as national champions and went on from there. So in 1901, Harvard, Michigan were recognized as national champions. 1902, it was Princeton in Michigan. 1903, Yale in Michigan. And in 1904, it was Penn in Michigan. They just couldn't give it up to Michigan. And really what Michigan did in those days is they began to get enough recognition that they fueled the growth of football across the nation, and they began to pull power away from the Northeast. The University of Chicago was important in that fact, too. It was a slow change, just like everything we see today is a slow change. But Michigan's early success was central to that cause of pulling the power away from the Northeast. There were some scandals around Yost regarding eligibility, paying players basically, in this era, but I'm going to leave them for a later video when I do a complete biopic on Fielding Yost. Fielding Yost was a very interesting and controversial person. He had an enormous ego. For example, it's hard to tell what innovations in football are actually credited to Yost because he tried to claim just about everything. This wasn't uncommon. My buddy Amos Alonzo Stagg and Pop Warner did much of the same. Like Walter Camp kind of did the same thing too. Everybody tried to claim that they invented the forward pass, or they invented the huddle, or they invented motion, or they invented certain formations. With regards to Fielding Yost's personality, I'll include the following tidbits. From the book The Tumult and the Shouting, My Life in Sport by Grantland Rice, published in 1954. Grantland Rice says he asked Pop Warner once in Yost's presence, who invented the spiral pass? Yost, Warner said, looking directly at him. He also invented everything else in the game, including the football. Yost seriously thanked Pop for the admission. Rice also said of Yost, Yost never listened to anyone in an argument. Once I met him and another coach in a violent debate in the lobby of a New York hotel around 5 p.m. I was going to a football party. They were supposed to be there. When I left for home around 2 a.m., they were still involved in the same wordy argument. I asked the other coach, name forgotten, why he had hung around for 7 hours. I was trying to get in a word, he said. Just one word. There's no doubt there's some bovine scatology involved there, but there normally is around everyone who's bigger than life. Fielding Yost was responsible for creating Michigan football for what it is today. He set the standard, and today Michigan is the #1 and the most winning school of all time. The Wolverines are the only team with over 1,000 wins historically, with 1,003. I'm Jon Johnston, and this is Hardcore College Football History. Please share this channel with your friends who love college football and consider subscribing as I wish to grow. Thank you. Oh my God, this is so long.